Welcome to Moveable Do. This is Steve Danielson. I'm a composer, conductor, and music educator. On this podcast, I talk with other composers and discover how they began their journey into composition. Join me each week as we explore their lives, their musical journeys, and of course, their music. To learn more about this podcast and access a complete archive of episodes, including the series of shorter segments called Movable Snippets, visit my website at sdcompose.com/movabledo. Hey, this is Steve. Thanks for joining me for this episode of Moveable Do. My guest today is Dr. Elizabeth Alexander. Currently living in St. Paul, Minnesota, Elizabeth studied composition at the College of Worcester and Cornell University, where she received her doctorate in music composition. She has received grants, awards, and fellowships from the McKnight Foundation, Jerome Foundation, New Music USA, International League of Women Composers, and American Composers Forum, among others. Her love of music, language, and challenging questions is reflected in her catalog of over 150 compositions in a wide variety of classical and vernacular styles. Her commissions have included music for orchestras, chamber ensembles, solo voices, and especially her choral pieces, which have been performed by thousands of choruses worldwide. Elizabeth Alexander, welcome to Moveable Do.
Hello, I'm glad to be here.
So you are currently in Minnesota, but your bio online says that you grew up in the Carolinas and Appalachian Ohio. So where was that exactly? Take me a little bit on your journey.
Oh, thank you for asking that. I was born in South Carolina, in the middle of nowhere, I guess you'd say. My dad was a country preacher, and but I lived there and later in three different cities in North Carolina. And when I was 10, I landed in about as far south in Ohio as you can get without being in Kentucky or
Okay.
West Virginia. And that's where I spent my childhood. And thank you for asking, particularly because a lot of my music didn't reflect that region until more recently. So it's just something I, in fact, not only didn't talk about for many years, but actually in graduate school many years ago, almost hid.
Oh,
As, it just, it wasn't something I knew how to talk about, and it certainly wasn't something people knew how to hear in that world at the time.
was that because you were afraid people would think it was like a backwater area, or what were you afraid of? What were you hiding it?
Wow. You go right to the point. You say, what were you afraid of? What a good interviewer. Yeah, I guess I was afraid of that thought. And also there were many comments. I would invite comments about little Abner, and
Okay.
um, people would um, come out with whatever stereotype they had most recently formed about that part of the country, or they would tell me, uh, "Oh, I don't know. Do you know that people in Pennsylvania call that city Versailles instead of Versailles?" And I would end up defending the people of that region. So yeah, I mostly learned to just live in sort of an academic world and then a choral world, which I guess at the time to me meant kind of Eurocentric choral music, which basically I also love. So
Yeah.
I just love a lot of different kinds of musics.
All right. When you were growing up, was your family musical?
My family was very, well, they were very musical. My mom taught piano lessons, and I sang a lot of school choirs, community choirs, church choirs. My parents weren't professional musicians, and there weren't really professional musicians around me except for perhaps church musicians, um, and school educators. So it was very community based. It wasn't like I was living in New York City seeing Broadway musicals or going to the New York Philharmonic all the time. So that was my upbringing, but it was really part of my daily life. It was just part of life.
Yeah. Who was your first sort of formal music teacher?
Oh my goodness, my mom. Well, I don't think that counts. I was about 4 or 5 years old, and I still remember the piano lessons. My mom was a great teacher. Um, I like to say that I remember the time that I fell in love with music was I was in the John Thompson teaching little children to play, and near the end is a duet of Home on the Range. And when you get to "and seldom is heard a discouraging word," there's this borrowed four chord, a borrowed minor four. And I remember thinking, oh my, what did you do? I just, every time I got to that chord, I thought, why do I feel this way? I couldn't believe it. And years later, I found out what that was and thought, wow, I was 5 years old and I was blown away with what a small musical moment could do for me.
That's fabulous. I I wish I could remember feeling that way when I took piano. I just remember thinking, I don't want to practice anymore.
You must have some moment though that
uh,
was
so,
mad.
so when did you start? When did you actually start composing music?
Well, I have a vague memory of writing a little song when I was 8 years old that had to do with jingle bells. My first notated music, though, which it was when I was eighth grade. I wrote a little music box song. I still have it. My grandmother insisted on buying 6 copies for $1 each. My
Wow,
first sale of music, and it was so lovely. She was very supportive. Even though my family had no concept of what it would be to be a composer, they just were going to support anything I did. Just kudos to them. Um, and then I started writing music in junior high and high school. A lot of it was dealing with my teenage stuff. I'd have a breakup and there I would write a song. The kids would pick on me and I remember writing a piano piece that was a theme and variations based on the song that the mean girls sang to me all day. And I went home and wrote it into a theme and variations. I think back now and think, boy, that was really psychologically a healthy thing to do. But at the time, I just instinctively did it.
that is
It was
amazing.
a real jam. It was really amazing. I would recommend it to anyone. If you
Yeah.
have a really bad experience, um, write a song about it.
And I love the idea of going and writing a theme and variation about it. I think that's fabulous. So I
So,
mentioned in your bio that you have a love of language, and that translates into writing many of your own lyrics for the pieces you write. So did you study
it does.
English or poetry, or is that something that you've just always done?
Well, informally, I've studied. I guess it's really very informal. My formal study is all in music, and in fact, I was told many times in undergraduate and graduate school, people would just toss off composers should never write their own lyrics, and I believed them. I thought, oh no, I shouldn't do that. I won't be any good. And honestly, it took me decades to realize that the lyrics I was secretly writing were actually pretty good. That it doesn't mean you can't. It just means you need to take on the discipline with the same effort that you're putting into your music. You can't just dash them off. Yeah, I was writing parody lyrics with my siblings from way, way back. The Randy Rainbow kind of parody lyrics, although they weren't political. And then I wrote poems and yeah, songs for myself.
That's awesome.
Uh, but it's informal, but it doesn't mean I haven't studied, I suppose. I mean, there are I have spent many hours marveling, and I guess you'd say studying. I didn't realize I was studying. I just thought I was trying to figure out how Billy Joel or Stephen Sondheim or Cole Porter put those amazing lyrics together. Like, how would you do it? And um, so I guess you'd call it craft. Eventually I thought that's what a bridge is for. That's what the last line of the bridge is for. That's where the transposition goes. Or yeah, I it's fascinating to think of how we learn and how little of it is really learned by formal study. Some of it we learn how to learn
Right.
in our formal study. But then the rest of it is enthusiasm and tenacity and just this desire to know how something works. Like my husband would take something apart. He wants to figure out how to put it back together. It's just because he really wants to know how it works.
That's a great skill. So do you prefer setting your own text or someone else's text, or do you feel a difference between those when you're setting music?
Well, they are different. At this point, I have a preference for setting my own text, but mainly that's because I feel like I have a lot to say. I have I'm working on a musical now. I've never written a musical before, and it's in country and folk music. And so right now, that's just where my passion lies. I love setting other people's text to music, and I've learned so much from it. That juicy feeling that you're discovering what a word wants to do, and what a line wants to do, and what the meaning of the poem really is. Um, I can't imagine only doing one or the other in my life. I've set a lot of other people's poems to music. I actually was setting a Denise Levertov poem together to music once. It's the Gloria from a set of poems called Mass of Thomas Didymus, which is the Doubting Thomas. Um, so I'm setting this poem to music for an entire month. And at some point, I realized what it was about after a whole month. I don't think that's going to happen if you're setting your own poem to music or your
Yeah.
own lyrics. So that extraordinary feeling of it all opening up. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is nothing but a list of definitions of God. Who knew? Who knew? I had no idea.
Yeah, I know for me, if I'm setting my own text, I don't feel like I have to please anyone else with it. Like if I'm setting someone else's text, I'm like, oh, are they gonna like the way I'm setting their text, or what? I have to interpret what they're doing. But when I'm setting my own, it's just right there, and I already know what I want to say.
Yes. You can also change the lyrics as you go, which means if you're like me, it means I may be discovering. This is silly. I just said that if you're writing your own song, you know what it's about. But if it's not your own lyric, you don't know. And now I'm going to completely contradict myself, and say that actually sometimes I'm writing a song and I do realize halfway through that it's about something different. So there I go.
Well, that's
Contradicting
the
myself.
that's the great thing about poetry. The interpretation always changes.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes.
So speaking of writing lyrics and music, I want to talk about Split Hickory, the musical you wrote set in Central Appalachia. So I
Yes,
know
and I
we're
should say I'm writing it. It's had workshops, but it's still
okay.
very much in flux.
So I know
Um,
we'll actually get a chance to listen to a piece from it later, but I'd like you to just give us a overview about the musical. What's it about? Why you're writing it? Just give us your elevator speech on this.
oh my goodness, what a great thing! I've been trying to write an elevator speech, so you're going to get my elevator speech as of today. Uh, Split Hickory is uh, set in Central Appalachia. The main character, Bonnie, is a college student who has left her small town, and uh, she's distancing from a lot of the distressing parts of her hometown, the um, economic outlook, the opioids, the lack of educational opportunities, by kind of taking on an urban persona in herself. She's going to fit in
Mhm.
to that place. Um, and she goes back to home and realizes that the um, the solution to this in her mind, the solution to this in her life is not divorcing herself from her hometown, and it's neither also not engaging with the outside world, but it's somehow integrating those two worlds together.
It
So,
sounds sort
boy,
of
you've
like,
got a cobbled together elevator speech, yes, with heavy biographical overtones,
yeah, I was gonna
autobiographical
say
overtones.
it sounds very similar to the journey you were explaining earlier.
It is rather, but the reason I feel like I want to write it is not actually just because it reflects my experience, but it reflects the experience of, oh, I don't know, thousands and thousands and thousands of young people who leave their hometowns because they have to. So it's not just a story of Bonnie, it's a story of her family and the whole community that loses, just, I'm going to say, hemorrhages its young people year after year after year because there's nothing that they can offer them. And just the devastation of the families being broken apart. And the community broken apart is large. And yet, I should say, it's actually really a funny show. And it's full of country music and folk music from the last 100 years.
All right.
Um,
Well, we'll look forward to that after you're done workshopping.
well, thank you for the opportunity to fumble through my latest version of my elevator speech. Come back in a year, and I bet I'll have it better.
Sounds good. So I saw online that you're part of the Compose Like a Girl series through Graphite Publishing. I'm actually doing an episode in the not far future with Jocelyn Hagan talking about this very thing. So, what does it mean
Yeah.
to you to be part of this series?
Wow. It's funny. I didn't really think I was joining the series exactly that, but I wanted to work with Graphite. And I love Graphite as a publishing and distributing model. It's just very respectful to the composers. And when the Compose Like a Girl started, I think I just kind of got folded in because I'm a girl, kind of a girl. But what it means to me to be a woman composing, wow, I guess one thing is really fluid. One thing is that it to me it's broader than just composing like a girl. It's really composing from who I am, composing as a woman, as a mother, as someone from Appalachia, and also living now in Minnesota. It's kind of incorporating everything in my life into my music, and I think that anyone in claiming their various personae or identities, um, it's valid to say I'm composing like a yoga practitioner. I'm composing like a gardener. I'm composing whatever you are to
Mm-hmm.
fully be who you are. And a lot of people, I know that when I was younger, I felt like I had to compose like somebody else. So compose like a girl to me kind of just means compose like yourself. Uh, Even if it's goofy, even if it's, I was having a conversation with my son today, and we were talking about various kinds of creations or art or theater. And he said to me, just offhandedly, if you were going to write something about that, we were having a flight of fancy, you'd probably make it more earnest. And I said, yeah, you're right. I kind of do earnest. That kind of is one thing I do. And I'm not saying it's good or bad. It's just a description of somehow what I do. I'm more likely to be earnest than cynical or subversive, or, it's just kind of part of composing from who I am. And somebody else might say, oh, I'm Mr. or Miss Cynical as me. I guess that's what I think about compose like a girl. Compose like what you are.
I love that. I love that. Compose like what you are. That's awesome. So, speaking of what you are and some of your whimsical thoughts, I'd like to turn to your blog, almost turned podcast, Composerly Thoughts. Could you give us a little rundown here? What are composerly thoughts?
Composerly thoughts is a phrase that I got from Stephen Stuckey, my primary composition professor in graduate school. And it came from a very specific time when I could not compose anything. Every note I thought, every note I wrote, I was second guessing. I'd write a phrase, and all I could think of was how terrible it was, or I didn't know what to do next. I was just paralyzed. And I suppose part of it was this comparing myself to constantly to Bartok or to Stravinsky or to every great composer I'd ever heard. So I I went into my lesson and I hadn't written anything, and I guess I was also very busy. And Steve said, "Okay, you may not be able to write every day, and you may not feel confident about what you're writing, but what I'm going to ask you to do is to sit down and spend a half an hour every day thinking composerly thoughts. As long as you're thinking composerly thoughts, you'll be all right." And ironically, that enabled me to sit down and actually write some music. I would think, okay, I'm not writing any music today. I'm just going to think some composerly thoughts. And then I wrote those composerly thoughts on the page. And I guess that helped me break through. And I've continued to think, what is a composerly thought? It's creative, it's musical, it's all your own. Um, it's pretty nebulous, but it's it's magnificent in that it doesn't tell you what you're supposed to do. It just is so freeing.
Yeah. I think honestly, I think it goes back to what you were just talking about with the compose like a girl and compose like yourself and just have those thoughts that are part of you and just let that come out on the page. I think that's wonderful.
It reminds me of some story I heard. I was introduced to this story through a book by Harriet Lerner. It's just a little anecdote where a student turns a paper into a professor, and the professor turns it back, and it's got red marking all over it. And in a big letters, the professor has written, "Be yourself." And then underneath that, the professor has written, "If this is yourself, be somebody else." And how sad that when I think about it, how often do we I'm going to claim that. How often do I say to somebody, be yourself, but not that, not that
Right.
self.
That's great. All right. So I want to ask about a performance of yours. Not a particular one that I can think of, but I want you to recall a performance of one of your pieces that you find memorable. What was it that stood out about that particular performance?
Goodness. I'm just going to go to a really recent one at a workshop. It was a song from Split Hickory. The song is called Family Chains. It's a song that Bonnie sings when she is feeling pulled back into her hometown. She's afraid she'll never escape the vortex of family. And she has a song where she pretty much, in her own mind, just trashes everything that she's grown up with so that she can get escape velocity out of that house, out of the region. So the song is called Family Chains. And I literally woke up last July before we were going to go into a workshop and I was going to hear it for the first time. And I looked at the song list and I thought, oh gosh, there's a lot of songs on this list. I think I have to drop a song. And I almost dropped that song. I almost said, I'm not going to even try that. It's got to be dropped. I ended up dropping another song, but keeping that one on and thinking, let's find out what happens. So I went in to the workshop and Debbie Hilda was singing it. And so I'd never heard it before. And she began singing it and she burned the house down with it. I was I was flabbergasted. I thought, that is what I wrote. I wrote that. It still blew me away. And when she performed it the next week in the public workshop, she did the same thing. People were scared after she sang it and should have been, it's very raw and real. So I'm just going to pick that because it's the most recent one. And it was literally a song I didn't think I liked.
Hmm.
I made a few changes based on what she did, but uh, wait, she told me what I wrote and I didn't even know.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Performers are, oh gosh, they're everything.
Yeah. All right, I've got one more question for you before we take a quick break. If you had the attention of the whole world for 5 minutes, what would you tell them?
You did not ask simple questions. Oh my goodness. Uh, I'm just going to I guess I would say what I'm telling myself all the time right now. Um, Slow down and listen. Just listen for 5 minutes to whatever the person in front of you is saying. Keep your mouth shut. It won't be easy. And just take it in. And it won't kill you. And don't argue. Just take it in. Um, and sit with it for a while before you need to respond and react. And if every one of us does that, at least the world won't get worse. And maybe the world will get better. This is my growth edge too, so I'm not lecturing you about something I got mastered, but it's a practice that I really am trying to hone. Guess
Well,
that's what I would say.
I appreciate that, and I will take that advice to heart. I think that's great. All right. Well, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll listen to some of Elizabeth's compositions. Welcome back. This is Steve Danielson. I'm talking today with Elizabeth Alexander. So I'd like to start today with a taste of home from your musical Split Hickory. You gave a general overview of the musical in our last segment. So how does this particular piece fit into the story?
A Taste of Home is, for me, it begins sort of like a song that simply might be nostalgic for home, saying I left, I thought I was going to see the big wide world, and ended up wanting to go back home. And there's lots of songs in that kind of genre that we're familiar with. I kind of think about Take Me Home, Country Roads, that I grew up with. But it's not really a simple song. It's that beautiful. The bridge is where the gist is that it doesn't always go down smooth, and heaven knows it doesn't always soothe my broken spirit. So sometimes I fear it. Uh, this, but when I'm around my kith and kin, no matter what misshapen shape I'm in, I'm a little more whole. I'm a little more free. I'm a little more me. It's got that ambiguity of that aversion and also love at the same time that we have with every authentic relationship we have. It's a mixed bag. So this I think it expresses not only what the protagonist feels, but because I think of this as a reflection of the whole country, that we all have a complicated relationship with the people we live with, and also the people who live far away from us, but we're all trying to integrate that.
Yeah. Is this still Act One in the show?
Uh, Maybe it is. There are reprises in
Okay.
in musicals, so probably Act One, maybe Act Two. But home is, and the complicated relationship with home, and the complicated relationship with our neighbors is a theme that goes through the whole show.
Okay. All right. Well, we are now going to listen to a taste of home from Split Hickory, here sung by Gary Rue.
When I was young and bold, I couldn't get enough of far-off things. Hardly could wait till I could leave the fold and cut them apron strings. Rugged mountains would I climb, golden beaches would I comb. I never thought that I'd be longing for a taste of home. Mama, she shed a tear, but that was not about to slow me down. Shaking the dust off of my boots, I quit that single stoplight town. Big ideas, fancy clothes, lofty skyline, shiny chrome. Without a backward glance, I thought I had escaped from home. Ooh, nothing tastes like home. It doesn't always go down smooth, and heaven knows it doesn't always soothe my broken spirit, and sometimes I fear it. But when I'm round my kith and kin, it doesn't matter what misshapen shape I'm in. I'm a little more whole, a little more free, I'm a little more me. Nothing tastes like home. Oh, whether you're far away or separated by a country mile, whether you said goodbye by joining up or by walking down the aisle, if you're anything like me, you will drift and you will roam, and then you wake up one day longing for a taste of home. Oh, nothing tastes like home. Ooh, nothing tastes like home.
All right, I'd like to turn next to How to Sing Like a Planet for SATB and piano, also for TTB. So after a slow, sort of sparse piano introduction, creating this very spacey, atmospheric sound, this piece blossoms into some very rhythmic fun, not only for the chorus, but also for the piano, a part which I love, by the way. So talk to us about writing this piece, and most importantly, how do you sing like a planet?
How do you sing like a planet? Well, I always like to say about this song that it would never have existed in this current form if conductor Eugene Rogers, who was the commissioning conductor as part of an ACDA Minnesota commission, had not said to me when I said, what would you like the song to be about? Would you like to approve the text? What are your thoughts? He looked at me and he said, write whatever, just whatever you want, anything. The sky's the limit. And that freedom was just incredible. And so that's partly why I was able to do this. And anyone who's ever sung with or seen Eugene conduct will know he is incredibly exuberant, that it just sparkles. He sparkles with life when he conducts. So that's part of the energy here. I found an article in San Francisco Gate, I think it's also called SF Gate, their newspaper, by I'm not going to remember the writer's name. I'll just have to go on. The title of it was How to Sing Like a Planet, and it described all the noise that the Earth makes, loud like volcanoes and molecular vibrating, and oceans and currents and waves. And I started imagining a song that had that much variety in it. And that if we could sing like a planet, like listen like a planet, here's the theme, listen like a planet. I think that's how I think the song actually says something about listening. If it doesn't, it should. Um, um, yeah, about letting go of control, about the trees make noise when the wind blows through them, but they're not gripping and controlling. They're just singing authentically and fully with all of their being. So I tried to put that in the song. I got some science in the song. I think I sat down with one of my kids. They were in high school then. And I remember asking them about like gravity and forces, like strong forces and weak forces or something, because science is actually like maybe advanced since I was in high school. And also, I remember having this conversation with my son Oliver about like what does it really mean that the Earth is wobbling on its axis? I said we had this long conversation about that. Yeah, it became what a celebration that song was. And every time I got to a place where I thought, are you really going to do that? Are you really going to jive and get like or groove and I thought, I don't know, Eugene Rogers said, do whatever you want. So I did.
That's a lot of fun. And honestly, the themes that you're talking about seem to reflect exactly what we were talking about earlier of being yourself. The planet doesn't try to be something it's not. It just sings because it is. And to sing like a planet is to just be you and not try to be something you're not. You just keep coming back to this theme. I love it. Absolutely love it. All right. Well, we are going to listen to the Massachusetts High School All-State Choir perform How to Sing Like a Planet. Our third piece today, The Gate is Open, for SATB a cappella. So I understand that you were first introduced to the poem for this song through a handmade Christmas card. Could you tell us more about that story and how it developed into this piece?
Oh yeah. My neighbor Margaret gave me a Christmas card and she had written this little poem inside. Margaret knew Sister Peron Marie, the nun who wrote the poem personally, and I was never able to meet her before the sister before she died. She was quite elderly then, but she was just a beloved teacher at one of the schools nearby. She taught French. And one of these teachers that the students always come back to visit and just affirmed the beauty in everyone. And this poem, it was about the mystery of the star, not necessarily even the mystery of a specific Christian or Christmas miracle, but just the unknown, and asking questions about, what is this star? And the biggest question was, dare we enter the unknown? And it felt so religious and also very ecumenical and also very universal. It just asks so many questions, like my neighbor Margaret, whom I adore. So yeah, when I was gonna I forgot what was the commission for The Gate is Open. Oh yeah, for the South Bend Chamber Singers. It was for a carol and or for a Christmas song. And yeah, I'm very interested in, I just end by saying this. I'm very interested in music that addresses the themes of holidays, but doesn't necessarily do it in such a way that the wisdom and beauty and of the holiday is just restricted to people who are of that religion. How can we find a way to make a religious idea or holiday or celebration more universal?
Yeah.
And that, for me, that question, we have no idea where we're going, but are we going to walk into the unknown? I thought, boy, that's pretty freaking universal.
One thing I noticed musically while I was listening was sort of constant motion. Until the very end of the piece, there seemed to always be movement in the piece. I don't know if you were thinking about this intentionally or if it was just more of a natural byproduct of these interweaving, sort of undulating voices, because you have these very polyphonic lines that are sort of weaving in and out of each other. And I don't know if you were intentionally, but it just always had this motion, this moving forward as I was listening.
I don't know that I had that in mind, but I really love hearing that idea. That one idea leads to another and it's pulling you forward. We aspire to that. And the performance you're going to hear really also helps that along. There's something, and as a musician, I know you know this, there's a way that performers can perform in a way that they are on beat 1 and on beat 2 and on beat 3 and on beat 4, but they can also reach a place where they are constantly reaching and yearning for what comes next. And the performance that of this song that I love, the choir really has that in it. So I'm going to credit the performers also for what I think you're hearing.
All right. Well, we will listen now to The Gate is Open, performed here by the South Bend Chamber Singers. All right, lastly today, let's get curious. So Get Curious for SSAA a cappella choir. This piece is a combination of emotions, or I should say it's rather a separation of emotions. So you start talking about how anger can get in the way of curiosity, and yet it's a tool as well. What do you mean? What are you talking about in this piece?
I'm going to tell you how I came to the quote. It's from when I was seeing a therapist in, oh my goodness, 2004 or five. And he was very, very good. He was also a poet, which probably contributed to him being a therapist I really resonated with. And one of the things I was struggling with at the time was anger. I just felt like I was angry about so many things. I would walk in, and I remember at some point saying, I just don't want to be angry anymore. I don't know my way out. And he said, if you don't want to be angry, get curious, because you can't be angry and curious at the same time. That just broke open my cage. It didn't solve all my problems, but it became the way that I got over being dominated by my demand that the world be different, that people act differently. Because I think that was the root at the time of the anger that I had. I just wanted the world to be different. I wanted to be able to make people behave in a way that I thought was gonna be better. So I lived with that notion for a really long time, and I still live with it. It's not my cutting edge the way it was then, and I'm not walking around angry all the time, but definitely it's part of my whole worldview. So when I wrote that song, um, I started kind of breaking it down like instructions. I think, how does it start? Start wondering what's behind things, what behind the daily grind of things. And I just started, it's a list piece, meaning that it's a lot of, it's an
Mm-hmm.
instruction manual in some ways, the same way as How to Sing Like a Planet is also a list piece.
Right.
But I had literally little pieces of paper or note cards all over, and every one of them had another instruction for how to get curious and why getting curious. I liked the idea that it wasn't start getting curious, it was get curious, as if curious was a thing. In fact, in the score, I think I capitalized curious as if it's a being. And I also capitalize words like righteous rage, and furious, as if they are actual characters that we are, or states that we are inhabiting. And that what I really want to get is a thing called curious, and to have it riding on my shoulder. So that, yeah, that when somebody looks at me cross-eyed, my first impulse is to say, golly, I wonder what that's about, instead of all the other thoughts I could have.
Well, I say that's a great topic for your first TED Talk. I think that's something you need to to work up. All right, we are going to listen to Get Curious, here performed by the University of Illinois Women's Glee Club.
Anger can be a beautiful thing, powerful, transformative. But sometimes anger can get the better of us. We can get hijacked by anger. We can get rigid, self-righteous. It can get in the way of listening. When that happens, it's time for us to get curious. Start wondering what's behind things, beyond the daily grind of things. Really intertwined of things. Get curious. Unpack the reason why of things. Of course you can't deny of things. The sweetest Anger can be a beautiful thing. Powerful. Transformative. Curious!
Well, Elizabeth, what are you working on now that you can tell us about?
Oh gosh. Well, for many years, I had multiple commissions lined up that I was working on, and I had a whole schedule. And hopefully I would stick with my schedule. I'd have deadlines every 2 or 3 months or however. And I thought to myself, I'm going to write this little musical whenever I get a break. And it just didn't happen. So after about 5 years of that, I said, I'm going to have to turn down the commission so that I can write this. So I've actually reached the point where I have actually cleared my schedule, and I'm just learning to write the book of my musical. I'm actually studying script. They call it book writing is the actual story of the book. And in musical theater, we have the lyricist, and we have the composer, and we have the person who creates the story, makes the framework. And it's the dialogue, but it's also the whole arc of it. And we call that the book writer. Because I'm the book writer of my musical, I guess at the beginning, I thought, oh, I'll just write a story and I'll write a musical. And I'm now learning that it's a kind of a hard skill. You have to learn it. Yeah. Like anything else. So I am full-time studying the structure of how a play goes together, how a musical goes together. I've taken some classes. I have a coach. My coach said recently, I was telling her everything I was reading, and she said, "You are creating your entire personal college course, in playwriting and musical writing with an entire syllabus." And I said, "I guess I am." So I certainly have it. So I'm delighted to say I'm a student. It's just a wonderful thing, and to have the freedom to do that is terrific.
Yeah. So if my listeners want to learn more about you and your music, what's your website? Where are you located online?
I am lyricist. If you want to listen to my music on YouTube, my YouTube channel is Songcrafter Liz, all one word. I guess those are the two best places.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Well, hey, listeners, this is where I normally do a shameless plug, and I just realized as I'm going through my script here that I forgot to actually write one down. So I'm going to go off the cuff here, and I'm going to say, come visit sdcompose.com/Moveable Do. There you will find the full archive of episodes. You'll see all our previous past guests. You'll also see a link to the merch store where you can get the Moveable Do logo on a t-shirt, a mug, sticker, whatever you'd like. It's there available for you. There's also an opportunity to support the show, become a subscribing member, and help support me and help me keep the music moving. So sdcompose.com/Moveable Do. Well, Elizabeth, today has been a joy. I appreciate you coming on the show. Thank you for joining me on Moveable Do.
It's been, people always say it's been a pleasure, but I will say it really actually has been a blast.
Fantastic. Well, my guest today was composer Dr. Elizabeth Alexander. If you have a recommendation for a future guest or an idea for the show, please email me at moveabledo@gmail.com. This is Steve Danielson. Keep the music moving.